Hello everyone and welcome to the third tutorial session. Today I will not take a lot of your time. In fact, all the things that are necessary for you to pass the exam have already been presented in the course. So I hope that you have the full knowledge of what is important for the exam, what is not important. Today's lecture I will devote to talk about the form and the shape of the exam, because as you know, due to the COVID constraints, we have to have a remote exam. And as I declared in one of the previous emails that I sent you last week, the exam will be organized as a quiz or model, which means to some extent that you can forget about what I said about the exam in the first lecture, about the way that the exam is going to be organized. So these are some additional things that we have to take into consideration and implement it in our way of designing the course. Therefore, this year there will be something totally different, not comparable to what was presented or what was offered by the course in the previous years. That is the exam that is not a written exam, but an exam that is a quiz. And this causes some additional problems, challenges for both of us, you guys and me as well. Which means that in principle, this should be a closed books exam. And of course, it's very hard to impose anything on you when you are going to solve the exam, at home or wherever you have an internet connection. But in principle, you should know it that this is a closed books exam, and you should not be, consulting all the other, all the materials that you have there. But apparently, I have no control over this. Therefore, the exam will be constructed in a way that consulting other materials is as inefficient as possible. In general, I'm pretty sure that you are still interested in how the exam will look like, and this is my goal for today's tutorial session, just to give you a brief overview of the types of questions that you can expect at the model exam. I'm pretty sure it will not take me a lot of time, which is good news for you and for me. But I expect that you will have some questions to me after seeing the video and after digesting what is important for the exam and how the exam will look like. Therefore, what I suggest is that today I will make 50% of the tutorial session, which will last 30 or 45 minutes. Then I accumulate all the questions that you sent me during the next week, or this week in fact, from Monday to Friday. And on Friday afternoon, Friday evening, I will post a second video, which would be tutorial 3.2, answering some of your questions and clarifying all the things that are not clear till now. Okay, hopefully that we can set our cooperation in this way. Because for the moment, I don't know what to say more about the exam apart from what I will present you right now in this in those slides. So maybe let's have a closer look at how I see the exam to be organized, and then we can go forward. And then I hope for a good cooperation between us, so that all your doubts are clarified in the end of next week or the beginning of next week. Okay, so there will be three types of questions. There will be numerical questions at the exam, theoretical questions, and there will be policy questions as well. So in fact, the structure of the exam is quite similar to what I planned to do before the COVID crisis, but the form is different. So the form will not include, writing down all the equations and solving the problem, those big problems. For example, the problem that we solved in tutorial 2, you remember it was a huge problem for 50 points. This will not be the case, but of course there will be some numerical questions that will require you to compute things. There will also be some theoretical questions related mainly to those things that are highlighted in the end of presentations, in the end of lectures, those main notions and definitions that you should know. And policy questions it's something that already have been implemented last year at the exam, and this requires a sort of deeper understanding of, on the one hand, how the theoretical models work. On the other hand, what are the policy interventions in the real world, and what are their consequences? Okay, so this will include, the crisis questions, the Argentina currency crisis questions, the Trump tariff questions, Brexit questions, and so on. You will see it in a couple of minutes. Okay. So as defined previously, the exam will last for 2 hours, so there is no change there. And what is important, and this I hope will dispel some of your questions and some of your doubts. The exam will cover all the lectures, all the presentations, all the chapters, additional materials, and problems that have been analyzed during the course. Only during the course, which means that the problems which have not been analyzed or not been solved during the course are actually, okay for you to solve, to have practice, but they are not 100% required to prepare the exam and to write the exam for 100%. You see what I mean? So you can do it for your own, good, but this is not what I require. Only things that have been discussed and analyzed in the class or during the course. Only those things are the relevant things, which is still a lot. I know that it is still a lot. Okay, so now let me give you some more detailed information about all the 3 types of exam questions that I'm planning to include in the exam, starting with the numerical questions. So you will be given some data inputs and you will be asked to compute, for example, an equilibrium value of a variable or the effect that policy has on a variable, which means this is super close towards what has been analyzed in the problems that we computed in the class, and there is nothing new for you, I guess. The only different thing is that the problem will not be very big, but it will be divided into, let's say, sub-problems and steps, and then at each step you'll have to give the final answer. The final answer, which in fact will be a single number that you are going to type, in a space provided in a line. Okay, so this would be a number. Normally, I know the value of equilibrium output, the value of equilibrium interest rate, or any other number, which was also the case in the numerical questions that we analyzed for the previous version of the exam. And now, once again, this is quite important. You should expect round numbers. Round numbers meaning 154 is still a round number, but 300.5677 is not a round number. So if you see something that is very suspicious and the result you get is very, very not round, let's say, this means that you have a mistake, and there is a huge probability that the answer you give me is not correct. On the other hand, if you have something that is round, to some extent, it might ensure you that you have the answer correctly. But of course, this might not be always the case. Normally, you should expect round numbers even at the model quiz exam. Okay, so the numbers will be prepared in such a way that all the results will be round numbers. Okay. And as you expect, these numerical questions will require your own some effort to compute things on your own. So on the one hand, please be equipped with a sheet of paper, a pen, and a calculator. Of course, you can use the spreadsheet, an Excel, or anything else that allows you to compute things. But in general, with a calculator, this would be easiest, and fastest. Then what is important is, once again, the thing that was important in the normal handwritten exam is to know how to divide the time in different things, how to optimize the time spent on different types of questions. Some of those numerical questions are going to be tricky and will require some long computations, maybe not very long, but reasonably long computations, which means that if you don't feel comfortable with those types of questions, you should not waste 30 minutes of your time to solve one numerical question. It's useless. It's waste of your resources. Your main resource here at the exam is time which is limited to 2 hours. And you have to know how to optimize the time to collect as many points as possible. Then each of the 8 numerical questions will be granted 5 points. And this maybe is in a bit of contradiction to what I said before, because previously I said that the difficulty of the questions will not be uniform. There will be simpler questions and more advanced questions in terms of numerical calculation. And then you see that all the questions are going to be granted 5 points. This is a bit of inconsistency from the first side, but there is a deep, let's say, thought behind this. This means that on the one hand, there will be some simple points to collect in the numerical questions. There will be some really simple numerical questions to solve, and you will get 5 points for answering correctly each of those. On the other hand, there will be some more difficult numerical questions to solve, and by definition, those questions are going to be for those guys who want to get, I don't know, 16 and above or 18 and above, okay? But once again, they will be granted 5 points. So this is your decision which questions you want to answer and which you want to skip. You have to decide on your own and try to evaluate what are your capabilities of solving particular questions. All in all, for the numerical questions, you will get 40 points out of 100, which is 8 times 5. And I expect that half of those questions will be rather easy. Half of those questions will be rather more difficult, but not super difficult. Okay, I will not give you, some crazy difficult things at the exam. All right, so you might ask me now, so what type of questions are we talking about? So let's try to have, an example numerical question that is going to be probably at the exam. Okay. So what do you have here? So consider an economy in which aggregate consumption is described by an equation. Okay, C equal to 200 plus 0.64 Y. G, which is the governmental consumption or the governmental expenditures, is equal to 60. Investments are equal to this particular function, which you hopefully know from the previous tutorial. And net exports is given by this equation. And now the question is, what is the value of output that equalizes aggregate demand and aggregate supply when the interest rate is set to I equal to 0.01? And that's all. And answer to this question is granted 5 points. I'm pretty sure that most of you know how to solve this problem because it's multiple times that we have already solved very similar things. But let me just give you a hint how to solve it. You simply write on the left-hand side the total supply of goods, which is equal to Y in the economy. On the right-hand side, you write the total demand for goods, which is equal to C plus G plus I plus NX. All right. So you have the equilibrium condition on the goods market. Then you should, clean the equation, the right-hand side of the equation, having a number plus something which is dependent on Y and something that is dependent on I. While on the left-hand side, you have Y. And another step is to simply substitute the interest rate equal to 0.01 to the right-hand side so that you are left with an equation that is Y on the left-hand side equal to a number plus something that multiplies Y. Okay, and this is the equilibrium condition on the goods market. So the only thing you have to do to solve the problem is to put the things that depend on Y on the left-hand side and compute the equilibrium value of Y. And apparently, if you solve this, you can do it on your own. The correct answer would be 1,500. So in the place that you have to type the result, you simply type 1500. Once again, round number, you should expect round numbers. You get 5 points if you are correct. Okay. Second type of question of the numerical questions. Consider an economy in which aggregate consumption is described by this equation with T equal to 0.2, this is the tax rate. Investments are equal to something like this. Is it correct? Yeah, it is correct. And then net exports is equal to something like this. All right. And the question is, what is the value of goods market multiplier in this economy? So it's a very similar question to what to the previous one, but now I'm asking about something different, not the equilibrium output, but the value of multiplier. How to compute the value of multiplier in such an economy? Well, the first step of solving this problem is kind of similar to what you saw previously. So you have to write the equilibrium condition on the goods market. Equilibrium output, Y, is equal to the sum of consumption, investment, and net exports, non-governmental expenditures here, okay? Okay, so you write those things on the right-hand side. Once again, you clean the right-hand side of the equation, so you get a number plus something that is dependent on Y plus something that is dependent on I. And you are almost done, because what you have to compute is simply the value of multiplier, which you know what it is. It's 1 over 1 minus the thing that is actually multiplying Y on the right-hand side, okay? So when you do the computations and you get the result, you will, well, the correct answer here is 2.5. That is the value of multiplier, which is 1 over 1 minus, you know, the thing that multiplies Y on the right-hand side of your demand equation. Fair enough, as simple as this. Now remember that some of the answers will require to write a number in this form, okay, in the form of not an integer number, let's say. But once again, you should expect something that is reasonably round. Not more than 2 digits after the comma will be required. So you can consider a number which is equal to 1.25 as a round number, but if you get something which is 1.387, this is not a round number. So once again, you should expect something which is reasonably round, and this is my declaration here, I will never ask more than 2 digits after the comma, which means all the numbers that you will get should be at most up to 2 digits after the comma. All right. Once again, this is a hint whether or not you have a good answer. Yeah, the third type of the numerical question that you can find in the exam: consider an economy in the medium run with the unemployment definition on the left-hand side, the mu in the middle, which is this margin that is imposed by firms on the labor market. Then you have the total labor supply L equal to 2000, and you have then the F function, which is this additional thing that determines the demand for labor on the right-hand side. Okay. And the question is, what is the natural level of unemployment in this economy? All right. So this question, maybe if I make it slightly more difficult, can be considered as a relatively more difficult question, because to answer this question you need to know many things. On the one hand, what is the definition of the natural level of unemployment? Secondly, how to compute the natural level of unemployment? And thirdly, where the natural level of unemployment comes from. Not only the fact that you need to know the natural the equilibrium level of output in the medium run. Well, apparently with those data you are not capable of solving this or of computing this particular value. So you have to know how to compute the natural level of unemployment in the economy without knowing the equilibrium level of output, or having the demand and supply side taken together. So aggregate demand and aggregated supply. In fact, what you need here, and this is the hint how to solve the problem, is you simply write down the aggregated supply function. Right? So the AS function with on the left hand side is P, on the right hand side is the expected value of P times 1 plus the mu, okay, times this F function that depends on the unemployment rate. So this is the first step. The second step, you need to know the definition of the natural level of unemployment, which means that it corresponds to the natural level of output. And then you need to know where the natural level of output comes from in the ADAS model. It's simply the medium run equilibrium. So then you need to know what is the definition of the medium run equilibrium when we talk about the AS curve. In AS curve, you have price level and the expected price level. You should know that the medium run equilibrium is equivalent to equalizing price level, current price level, and the expected price level in the economy. And this is the second step you have to make to solve the problem. Simply use the definition of the medium run equilibrium and equalize P and P expected. This will, make both sides, so both p's on both sides of the AS equation to cancel out. So you will be left with an equation which is something similar to 1 equal to 1 plus mu times 1 minus 2u. But this u is going to be exactly the un that you are looking for. Because what? Because you impose the median run equilibrium, you equalize the prices, the actual price level and the expected price level, which means that the output in this equilibrium is going to be the natural output, so the equilibrium output, which will correspond to the natural level of unemployment rate. So you have one equation and one unknown, which is un, and you simply compute un. If you succeed, you will get the answer 0.2 or 20%. But remember that you always have to put the number not in percent, but in a way that it comes from the equation. All right, so it's 0.2 the correct answer to this question. Hopefully that you will succeed in solving this on your own at home while preparing for the exam. All right. Okay, cool. So let's stop with the numerical questions. I hope that all is clear. The only thing that is maybe unclear is the level of difficulty of the questions. I'm pretty sure that you get the level of difficulty of the easy questions. This is more or less, simple points to collect for all of you. While the more difficult questions are going to be a bit more difficult, right? Even difficult than what you see here. All right, so note in mind what are your expectations in terms, the comparative advantage, in terms of the comparative advantage you have in doing different things, answering the theoretical questions, answering the numerical questions, okay? All right, so let's move to the theoretical questions. So here, the idea is that those types of theoretical questions will include a notion or a definition and 5 statements listed below. And the definitions or the notions that are going to be asked in those types of questions are going to correspond to those focuses for the exam, which are listed at the end of all the lectures that you have out there on Moodle. And you should really focus on those really important definitions. But of course, there is a probability that some questions will relate to things that are not mentioned in those focuses. But the probability of such an event is relatively smaller than the probability that a notion that is in the list will appear, okay? And your job is to choose those statements about this definition that are true. And what is important, those theoretical questions are going to be multiple choice questions, which means that all the combinations of true-false sequences are equally probable. So you can have a question and 5 statements, and all of the statements can be correct. All of the statements can be false. Everything in between those two extremes is also probable. So all the permutations of the true-false combinations are probable. So please don't be surprised by the fact that you have a question with all the answers correct, or the answers incorrect. This is probable, okay? So you have to be really prudent in terms of analyzing each and every statement and deciding whether it's true or false, because any of the combination of the answers is possible. What is important is that points will be granted for every single correct answer, which means that if you have five statements and 3 of them you judge correctly and 2 of them incorrectly, you get 60% of points which are ascribed to this particular question, okay? In the same way, if one of the statements you judge correctly, you get 20% of the points for this particular question. Probably, very probably, there will be 40 points to collect from these theoretical questions. And once again, there will be 2 types of questions, but now with different point scales. Easy questions will be for 2 points in total, and more advanced and tricky questions will be for 4 points. Once again, what does it mean? It means that if you take an easy question for 2 points and you correctly judge all the 5 statements, you get 2 points. If you judge correctly 4 statements out of those 5 in the easy question, you get 1.6 points. If you judge correctly only one statement, you get 0.4 points. While for the more tricky questions, it's 0.8 points for each and every statement. All right? It's just like this. Yeah, I hope everything is clear. So maybe it's a good moment to just give you some examples of those theoretical questions that you can expect. So you have the question, which is super reduced form, the IS curve. So you know that we are going to talk about the theoretical definition of the IS curve. So you have statement number one. The IS curve has a slope of 1 minus C1. You know what C1? It's the marginal propensity to consume. At the exam, all the variables will be explained. I'm lazy, so I didn't do it here in the presentation. But note that all the variables I will use there will be explained. Okay. So once again, the first statement: the IS curve has a slope of 1 minus C1. True, false? You have to decide on your own. Hint: no, it's not true. This particular answer. Okay, so this is false. So you don't click it, or you don't say that it's true. Second, the IS curve is a set of points yi that are goods market equilibrium or equilibria. Is it correct? Of course it is. Number three, the IS curve shifts when governmental expenditures change. Is it correct? Well, to know this, you need to have an idea of what is behind the IS curve, but I'm pretty sure all of you have the good idea on what are the ingredients of the IS curve. And yes, indeed, the IS curve will shift when the governmental expenditures change. Another question or another statement: the IS curve shifts when the money supply changes. Obviously not, because this is what the LM curve is gonna capture in the ISLM model. So this statement is false. And the last statement: the IS curve is downward sloping. And of course, we mean the downward sloping in a standard YI space. Okay, so output versus interest rate. I guess it's clear that you cannot have any other space here in the IS curve, so maybe it's not reasonable for me to to explain it in such a detail. Just ask whether or not it's downward sloping. Of course, it is downward sloping, so the statement is correct. Voila. This is a rather easy question. Okay, so 0.4 points for each and every statement that you judge correctly. Another type of question, or another example of the theoretical question that you can find at the exam: bilateral real exchange rate. And here is the definition: epsilon h over f, which means this is exactly the definition we are going to talk about in the statements below, right? You remember that you can have different definitions of the real, nominal exchange rates, depending on which country is in the numerator, which country is in the denominator. Here we focus only on this definition, and this is kind of important. Statement number one: compares prices of goods in home and foreign country. Of course, yes. Decreases with prices in age. Yeah, and this is important now to to go back to the exact definition that we set up in the question, because it determines the answer to this particular question. Now, of course, you need to know what is the definition of the real exchange rate. So it's equal to the nominal exchange rate h over f times ph over pf in principle. And knowing this, you are ready to answer the question or say whether the statement is true or false. Decreases with prices in the home country. And the statement is of course false, because the prices of the home country will be in the numerator of the quotient in the real exchange rate, which means that the real exchange rate will increase with prices in the home country. Another statement: when the real exchange rate epsilon h over f is below 1, then home currency is undervalued. Once again, the type of definition determines the answer to this question, and apparently the answer is correct. If epsilon of this type is below 1, this means that home country currency is undervalued. Another statement: the real exchange rate has no unit. True or false? I hope that you know it. I will not spoil you the answer here. And the last question: is always equal to terms of trade home over foreign country. And once again, I'm pretty sure all of you know the answer to this question. I will not spoil it. Have fun and try to answer it yourself. Another theoretical question that we can find. Oh, once again, this is rather easy question here. This is rather an easy theoretical question once again. And one more theoretical question, which is also an easy question. I will not, spoil you the more difficult questions. You will have. Don't worry, they will be not very difficult. They will simply be tricky. There will be, some small words that will differ, and you have to only be more focused while answering the more difficult questions than by answering the easy questions, because easy questions, as you can see, it's just like tick 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 tick, true false, true true false. It's super simple, right? You just tick it and you take 30 seconds to answer it, while the more difficult question will require a bit more time and effort and focus on, to answer it correctly. Once again, this question here is not a difficult question. It's rather an easy question, and as you can see, it relates to the notion of comparative advantage. Statement number 1 determines specialization patterns in trade. Of course, yes. Statement number 2 is beneficial only for big advanced economies. Yeah, you can you can question it, but in principle, I gave you some arguments for this statement not being true. And apparently, what I expect in answering this question is that this statement is not true. There might be some cases in the real world that actually this statement might be correct, but apparently what has been presented in the lecture and what is the mainstream and what is the 99% of cases in the real world is that this statement is not going to be true. That is why correct answer to this statement is that it's not true. All right. I hope that you get the sort of difficulty of of answering this particular question. You should stick to what has been presented in the exam. A sort of authoritarian way of answering the exam questions. Number 3, generates gains from international trade. You have plenty of examples during the course, during the exercises that we solved, that it is, of course, the case. The statement is true. Another statement considers dynamic changes in trade patterns. And there was a part of the trade lecture in the comparative advantage section that actually gave you many examples and arguments why this is not the case, why this is false. And you should remember this and consider and judge that this statement is, of course, false, because comparative advantage is rather a static notion. It doesn't consider the dynamics of international trade patterns. And finally, is determined by relative productivities. Obviously, yes. It just comes back to the definition of the comparative advantage. So these types of questions, of theoretical questions, you can expect in the exam. I hope this is understandable what I'm requiring from you. I hope it's not as difficult or not too easy. I will try to balance it out so that not all of you get 100%. But some of you will get at least 98%, hopefully, so that you see that you need to be on the one hand focused and really pay attention to the smallest details of the particular question, because there are really many small things that can be tricky in those types of questions. Decrease with prices in H, increase with prices in F, and so on. There are many things that you can many traps that you can fall into in those types of questions. Okay. So the final type of the question is the policy questions. And in those types of questions, you will be asked to evaluate the statements about policy interventions, the real world policy interventions which we discussed during the course. For example, in the context of the subprime crisis, in the context of Argentine crisis, in the context of the trade tariffs, Brexit, or maybe not Brexit, trade tariffs. Okay. Then draw conclusions about economic consequences of shocks, and here the Brexit questions can appear. Things that you should have prepared yourself, or the consequences of increase in the interest rates after decrease in interest rates after the subprime crisis. What are the consequences? What are the economic consequences of this particular shock? What are the economic consequences of, for example, the fixed exchange rate in Argentina? Okay, there will be some statements once again, and you will have to judge whether or not they are true or false, and say what is the policy consequence of an ISLM or ADAS model. And this relates more or less to understanding how those theoretical models work, but in the policy context. So in principle, what you should know is how to shift different curves, what makes those curves shift, and what are the consequences of shifting those curves. I will give you an example just in a couple of slides. So as I mentioned before, these questions will include analyzing real scenarios that we discussed in the class. This is one type of question, but I also asked you to prepare some stuff about Brexit, or to have a general perception about Brexit. So there is a probability that some questions about Brexit will also appear at the exam. All right. Once again, these are multiple choice questions, which means that there will be an introduction of the question and 5 statements that you have to judge true or false. All the combination of true false are equally probable. So the rules are quite similar to before, but there will be 5 questions and 4 points each, which means those questions are relatively more difficult to answer and are mainly targeted to those guys that want to get 16 and above. Okay. And as I mentioned, there will be 5 questions, 4 points each. So in total, 20 points for policy questions. So all in all, you have 40 points for numerical questions, 40 points for theoretical questions, and 20 points for policy questions. Examples. So the first example relates exactly to what you were asked to prepare, more or less. If you were the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in the context of Brexit, you would expect that a British pound appreciates. Now, it's of course this is very let's say okay. I can imagine that there are arguments which would say that this statement is true, but this constitutes 5% of all arguments that you can make about this statement. So you should really consider take those paths which are extremely more probable, which means that the answer to this question is that this statement is incorrect. Okay, relatively speaking, the British economy after Brexit is going to be weaker, which means that the pound is expected to depreciate, not appreciate. Okay. After Brexit, there will be intensifying of trade exchange with the EU. Of course, most of you have the intuition that this statement is not true as well. Okay, due to the fact that there will be additional tariffs imposed on the UK-EU trade flows, this will not boost the trade between the 2 countries. But of course, the reality does not like emptiness, which means that UK should replace this missing trade with the EU with the trade with the non-EU countries. And this is exactly what the C question is asking here, that after Brexit, there will be intensifying trade with the United States. Once again, this is a bit of shaky and not 100% certain answer to the question, but there are more signs of the fact that this statement is actually going to be true after Brexit. That UK is going to export and import to and import from all the non-EU countries slightly more intensively than previously before Brexit, because they have to really substitute trade with the European Union. Terms of trade of United Kingdom will improve. Once again, this is, I think you can answer this question only after different things about the notions here. The notion of the terms of trade, that what it means, right? How it's built, and what it's dependent on, plus what the ingredients in the terms of trade, how they are going to be affected by Brexit. And apparently the answer to this question is, at least I would consider the answer to this question as as positive, that it's gonna be true. Why? Because the prices, the nominal exchange rate, is it correct? Terms of trade of UK will improve. So what we will have there is the nominal exchange rate that multiplies the prices of exports from UK over the prices of exports to the UK. And apparently, what is rather probable is that the nominal exchange rate is going to fall, which means that terms of trade of the UK is rather going to fall, assuming that the prices are not going to be affected. You see, these are the types of tricky questions which I should maybe avoid asking you at the exam, because there's this question is very close to 50-50. All right, and when it's 50-50, it's difficult to ask you such a blurred question. So once again, I declare that the questions that will be at the exam, the policy questions that will be at the exam, will be way more sharp than this one. Okay, which means that it will be a bit more obvious which answer is true or false. Like, for example, the last one. After Brexit, you should expect larger inflows of immigrants to the UK. And of course, this is rather not true, because there will be a huge stop in inflow of immigrants from the main sources of the European Union, Germany, Poland as well, which means that rather you should expect smaller inflows of immigrants after Brexit. Fair enough. The second type of policy question relates to the theoretical modeling in terms of the policy interventions, and asks about the short-run ISLM model. Statement number one: the equilibrium output increases with consumption. Of course, it's true. The equilibrium interest rate increases with consumption. Is it true or not? Well, to know this, you need to know how the IS and LM curves are shifted by increasing consumption, exogenous increase in consumption. Okay. And you will know that when you do this simple, graphical exercise by implementing a correct policy change in the ISLM model, you will know that both output and interest rate increase with consumption. So both of those statements are correct. Third statement: trade balance improves with when G increases, which is the governmental expenditures. So to know this, once again, you need to know what happens to the ISLM model, how the curves are going to shift. So in this case, when G increases, the IS curve is going to shift upwards. But then you should also know how the open ISLM model works and how the net exports reacts to an increase in demand, in principle, in the governmental expenditures. So the correct answer to this question is, of course, that this is not true. When G increases, of course, the trade balance deteriorates, because exports is considered to be exogenously given in the ISLM model, and while imports is a function of is an increasing function of output, while output increases with governmental expenditure. So by definition, trade balance does not improve when G increases. Another statement: trade balance improves when supply of money reduces. And here, once again, you need to picture the shifts of the curves in the ISLM model. So what happens when the money supply reduces in the ISLM model? Of course, the LM curve will shift to the left-hand side, which means that the equilibrium output will be now lower. And this, of course, means that imports will be lower. So this statement is actually true. Trade balance will improve when the supply of money reduces. And the final statement: change in exports shifts the IS curve. And of course, this statement is true because exports enters the IS equation in an exogenous way. Okay, so changing exports is an exogenous shock to the goods market in the home country, which means that the IS curve will simply shift, just as it shifts when G changes or taxes change or the exogenous level of consumption changes, the C0 changes, all right? So these are the types of policy questions that you can expect. Once again, I promise that those really policy questions are going to be sharp, like super sharp, so that you will have no doubt, if you know how the reality is working, you will have no doubt which of the statements are true, false. There will be no blurry statements like this one, which is sort of 50-50. And once again, the majority of the policy questions will relate to those cases that we analyzed in the class. That is the 2008-2009 crisis, the COVID crisis, Argentina, Donald Trump tariffs, and yeah, it seems that it's more or less all. And maybe Brexit. Okay? Fine. So the last thing I would like to point out right now at the end of this short video, or not that short, but still video, is that I cannot impose anything on you during the exam. And this is a big shame that we have to do it in this way due to the COVID crisis, that we have to do it remotely. But it also, to some extent, checks your moral code, whether or not you are a trustworthy and honest people. Because communicating with others during exam will be considered as cheating. Same with using notes, books, and prepared materials would be also considered as cheating. Consulting previously solved problems would be considered as cheating. More or less, using internet, Google, Wikipedia, or any other source is considered as cheating at this remote exam. But of course, I have no control over what you are going to do during the 2 hours of the exam. Therefore, it is your ethical code that should conduct your way of solving the exam on Moodle, whether or not you are going to stick to those exam rules. I cannot impose anything here. I cannot control you. The only thing I can do is simply to tell you that if you do some of those things here listed in this slide, you are considered as cheating in the exam. But it's on your own judgment whether or not you want to do it and you want to cheat, or you want to be honest and solve the exam just using your own knowledge, what you learned during the course. All right. Okay, so this will be the end of today's tutorial, first part of the tutorial. Please now ask questions. Send me an email or put it in the comments on YouTube, whatever you want. Maybe email is more preferred. And next week, either Friday or even next Monday, I will prepare one more video with answering the questions if there are plenty of important questions. If the number of questions is not that big and hopefully everything is more or less clear, I will simply answer the questions in the email. All right. So once again, write an email on Moodle so that all of you get the answers to the questions asked by your colleagues. So prepare well for the exam. Focus on the things that are very highly probable to appear at the exam. You know what things there are of this type. For those of you who want to get really good marks, focus on all the rest things as well. The things which are not also probable to appear at the exam, but not listed as the key highlights of the course. And I hope that you will succeed in solving this type of exam without referring to those methods which are considered as cheating. Hopefully. So good luck with your exams. Good luck with your exam session. If we don't see each other, if I don't prepare another video, all the best for your next studies. Remember, you can always contact me whenever you have a question related to the course, to the exam, to the content of the course, or to anything else related to macroeconomics. And I stay open in cooperating with you guys. So thanks for attention today, and we stay in touch for at least a couple of days in the next week. Okay? See you then.